RX-7, the RX-8 and the 787B race car all have something in common: the rotary engine. The famous spinny Dorito holds a special place in any petrolhead's heart as a key part of JDM car culture. So why is it so popular when it's so damn flawed? They're terrible on fuel, even worse on oil, and can be expensive to fix, and their torque figures are pretty weak. So let's take a look at why rotary engines kind of suck and why they might actually be making a comeback. Japanese performance cars are hugely popular, with the used car market for 90s JDM icons absolutely booming at the moment. And that's because if you want a rotary, you have no choice but to go used, as current new cars don't use them. Anyway, the Supra, the Skyline, the Evo, the Impreza, they're all just a few examples of the rising sun's offering of attainable performance cars. These were turbocharged, often motorsport-derived saloons and sports cars that offered a hell of a bang for your buck. Cars like the R34 GTR, the Mark IV Supra, they gained a reputation for being giant killers with huge tuning potential. However, they've all got something in common. They've all got old-fashioned piston engines. And if you want to stand out from the crowd, the RX-7 was the one for you. Sure, it wasn't the first rotary-powered Mazda. In fact, there were a fair few before it. There was the Cosmo Sport, the RX-3, the RX-500, as well as the world's first and only rotary engine pickup, the REPU, obviously named the Rotary Engine Pickup. Why would you call it anything else? The RX-7, however, was part of a golden era of Japanese performance cars that really made it desirable. The most popular generation of the RX-7 was the last one, the FD, a two-seater sports car with pop-up headlights and a slick, futuristic design. It doesn't get more 90s looking than that. Appearances in movies and video games like the Fast and Furious and Need for Speed definitely helped its popularity. Han's Veilside RX-7 in Tokyo Drift is now a cult classic among car fans, and you can always guarantee that any racing game worth its salt would have an RX-7. What made the RX-7 really stand out from its rivals was its engine. It was called the 13B. It was a 1.3 litre two-rotor helped by sequential turbos, one working up to 4,500 RPM and the second one kicking in at higher RPMs. It was a clever solution for the time. It meant you could use one slightly larger turbo, creating higher peak horsepower without the decades of lag that typically comes with a large single turbo solution. Anyway, power was rated at 255 horsepower, making it more than a worthy rival for cars like the Porsche 944 and the Honda NSX. But hang on, how do you make a 1.3 litre engine in a standard road car make 255 horsepower? It sounds a little too good to be true, and that's the magic of the rotary. Just quickly, let's go over where the rotary engine came from and how it works. The rotary engine's origin can be traced back as far as the late 1800s, with its use in aviation and motorbikes, albeit in a slightly different guise to the Dorito we know today. These work differently in that they had pistons, usually in an odd number like 5, 7 or 9, that rotated around a fixed crankshaft. That was until a 17-year-old German engineer came up with the genius pistonless rotary engine. And this was Felix Wankel, the man behind the Wankel rotary engine. His intention was to create a dream engine, one that was lightweight, efficient, cheap and easy to repair. And whilst the fundamentals of Wankel's new engine are similar to that of a regular piston engine, except everything is a slightly funny shape and much smaller. Instead of conventional pistons, you have a triangular shaped rotor. In place of the cylinders, you have an ovalish housing with two flat sides, and it uses pressure created by combusting air and fuel, same as normal. It just goes about it in a different way. Remember using one of these in school? It's called a spirograph, and its movement is very similar to what you'd find in a rotary. The 3 points of the rotor remain in constant contact with the edge of the housing, creating 3 separate sections that constantly expand and contract as the piston moves around the output shaft. So where a piston engine expands and contracts using a piston moving up and down, the Wankel rotary uses these pockets which expand and contract as the Dorito moves around the middle and rotates. Watch this pocket here. As the engine spins, the air-fuel mixture is injected whilst the pocket is pretty large. Then with more motion, the mixture is compressed as the pocket gets smaller, and at this point it's ignited by 2 spark plugs. This then drives the rotor, again expanding the air, forcing out of the exhaust port, and it's pretty clever. Most rotaries, like the RX-7, have twin rotors, so one rotor on each side. They're also 180 degrees out of sync, meaning any vibrations are mostly cancelled out. You do this on piston engine cars, with an even number of cylinders, that matters. So it's sort of similar to a regular engine, but pretty different. So what benefits come with that? As we mentioned before, rotary engines pack a considerable punch for their size. so you can see why it's an appealing proposition to put one in a sports car. Per litre, there are very few piston engines that can compete with a Rotary without throwing turbochargers into the mix. For example, the naturally aspirated Rotary-powered Mazda RX-8 has a specific output of 174 brake horsepower per litre, whilst the 8-litre quad-turbo 16-cylinder Bugatti Veyron only manages a measly 148 brake horsepower per litre. Granted, the RX-8 definitely isn't faster than the Veyron, no matter how much an owner tells you it is. But you get my point. Rotary engines are very efficient at making power. Compared to a regular engine's internals, which are constantly moving in different directions, a Rotary's all spin in one direction, making it much smoother and more balanced. Where you get up and down vibration in a piston engine, a Rotary engine produces it lengthways, meaning they feel very smooth. And speaking of internals, that's another benefit it has over a piston engine. There are just less of them, considerably less in fact. A 2-rotor engine has just 3 main moving parts, the rotors and the output shaft. Compare that to even the most basic piston engine and the number will be at least 10 times that. But does it make it more reliable and easier to fix? Well, possibly, but we'll get to that. One of the key benefits is a Rotary engine's inherently small overall size. Take a look at the engine bay of this RX-7. Yes, it looks a bit busy, but you can see just how the 13B's compact dimensions means the engine could be pushed way back in the engine bay. This aids the weight distribution and improves the car's handling characteristics. Lumping more weight over the front wheels can lead to the disappointment that is understeer, so having the engine as far back and as low as possible really helps. Does that make it mid-engined? Kind of mid-engined. The unique design gives the Rotary a very unique noise, one of the biggest reasons people still love them today. Fewer moving parts and lighter weight mean the engines tend to rev incredibly high. And for example, the RX-8 we mentioned earlier revs to 9,000 RPM, a number that would make even the most hardcore Type R fan stand up and clap. The aftermarket scene has kept the Rotary community alive and kicking. The Mazda RX-7's turbocharged engine made it hugely popular to those wanting to extract a bit more power from the 2-rotor. Whip out the sequential turbos and replace them with one massive single turbo. Throw in some supporting mods and you'll have yourself a seriously quick car. So they sound great, make decent power, and are designed to be reliable and efficient. So surely there are no downsides. Well, that's where you'd be wrong, because they can be an absolute ball ache. Unfortunately, Rotaries have a drinking problem, and their beverage of choice is copious amounts of oil and fuel. Insert the airplane meme. Sorry, that got me. Rotary owners always have to keep on top of their oil level because these engines are naturally designed to use more oil. Any RX-8 owner will tell you that they have to fill up the oil after every 3 trips to the petrol station. They tend to inject oil into both the intake manifold as well as the combustion chamber in order to keep the apex seals, they're the ones at the tips of the rotor, lubricated. Burning more oil in turn also makes the engines worse for the environment, which could make it a hard sell in the current climate. Add to this the fact that they're awful on fuel and you start to realise why they never caught on. Because they're not produced in the same numbers as piston engines, a Rotary engine could be an expensive thing to fix when it goes wrong. Unless you're very lucky, you won't be able to send this down to your local mechanic to fix your worn apex seals. You'll need specialist knowledge and the parts are more expensive too. You'll also notice that there are a load of RX-8s going cheap online. This will immediately have you trawling through online forums looking for common problems, and sure, you'll find a load of horror stories about engine failures at low miles and astronomical rebuild costs. And if you go to a specialist, a basic rebuild will probably set you back around $2,600. And for a cheap Mazda, this can often cost more than the car's worth. That cheap RX-8 isn't looking like such a good deal anymore, is it? So you'll see why Mazda dropped them. After years of being faithful to the Rotary, they eventually became too difficult to meet emissions regulations. They weren't exactly a huge sales success either. In the US, in 2010, the RX-8 sold just over 1,100 cars. And when you compare that to the newly introduced piston-powered Nissan 350Zs, which sold 10 times that, you can see that the Rotary just didn't have the same appeal anymore. However, that didn't stop Audi giving the Rotary a chance. 10 years ago, the German car maker tested a single rotor, 20 horsepower Wankel engine. 10 years ago, the German car maker tested, oh, for sake. Audi made one as a generator for an electric Audi A1. And when you think about it, it's an ideal choice because of its compact size and smooth running. It's not quite the Rotary return we would have hoped for, but it shows it can still be useful in the modern day. 5 years ago, Mazda teased us with the stunning RX Coupe concept, which gave Rotary lovers around the world hope that maybe, just maybe, it would make a comeback. Unfortunately, that's all it ever was, a concept. It does seem that Mazda just can't let its little Dorito-shaped friend go, because a few years years ago, the Japanese car maker announced it would be resurrecting it as a range extender, much like that electric Audi A1 concept we talked about earlier. Well, it does exactly what it says on the tin. Electric car range is a hot topic at the moment, and utilizing a combustion engine as a generator to charge the batteries means that the range can be increased just that little bit more. The expected range of the MX-30 hasn't been released yet, so it'll be interesting to see just what effect the rotary generator has. And yes, it's a crossover, and yes, it's electric, but we're glad to see such a unique and innovative engine live on in some form, because it's unlikely we'll ever see it in a sports car like the RX-7 and the RX-8 again. You should watch this video we made about modern cars failing this one specific crash test. Thanks very much for watching, and we'll catch you in the next one.